There was no wind when he found her. No movement in the grass and no bird song, and not even a breeze to make the twisted tree groan. Only the creak of a rope and the silence that comes after violence. She was hanging from a branch like a forgotten coat, her arms limp, her feet barely brushing the sand. A young Apache girl, no older than 15, with skin dusted in the dry red of the plains and black hair matted against her cheeks. Her head slumped forward. A wooden sign swung from her neck, catching the sun with every slow turn. White man takes what is his. The letters were carved deep, fresh, splinters curled upward where the blade had dug too fast. The message wasn't just for her. It was for anyone who dared to look. And the man on the horse, he looked. He didn't move at first. He just sat there, reins loose in his fingers, sweat darkening the rim of his hat, the kind of man weathered from the inside out. Dust clung to his boots, his sleeves, even the lines on his face, but his eyes were fixed on the girl, not in pity, not in fear, but in something slower, something older, like recognition. Behind her, the twisted pinon tree reached its crooked limbs to the sky, bark blackened by lightning scars. Around its base, the earth was scattered with broken glass, horse tracks, and 2 feathers, one white, one red, both pressed into the sand like some god had pinned them there in mourning. He dismounted finally. One boot thudded to the ground, then the next. His spur caught the sun for a second, then vanished in shadow. He didn't shout for help. There was no one to hear it. He didn't draw his gun. There was no one left to shoot. He just walked slow, deliberate toward the girl whose face he could barely see, her hair draped across it like a veil of soot. The closer he got, the more the sign seemed to scream. The words weren't just carved. They were cursed. White man takes what is his. What? He stopped just beneath her, close enough to hear the wood groan with her weight, close enough to see the purple-black bruises along her ribs. One of her hands twitched, and that's when his breath caught. She wasn't dead. She was close, close enough that death had licked her skin and left its mark, but not gone. Not yet. His hand went to the rope, but then he froze. The sign swayed between them like a threat. Who had done this, and why leave her barely alive, not out of mercy? No. This was a message, a warning, a test. He looked around. The sky stretched empty in all directions. Not a soul, not a witness, only him and her and that damned sign. He reached up anyway. His fingers grazed the rope. The bark scraped his knuckles as he climbed onto a low root and worked the knot. It was tight. Hastily done, like whoever tied it didn't care if it held forever, only long enough to be seen. When the rope gave, her body collapsed against him, dead weight, but not dead. He cradled her like something fragile, like she might crack in his arms. Her breath came shallow and hot against his neck. She weighed nothing, or maybe she weighed everything. The sign hit the dirt beside them. He didn't touch it, not yet. Instead, he wrapped her in his coat, lifted her gently, and walked toward the horse, still waiting in stunned silence. One step, then another, each boot print marking a choice. He'd seen death before. In war, in raids, in cold winters when food ran dry and neighbors stopped knocking. But this was different. This was the kind of cruelty that left a stain, that couldn't be outrun, the kind you carry not in your hands but in your gut. He set her gently on the saddle, climbed up behind, and held her steady. As they turned to leave, the breeze finally came. It lifted the feathers from the dirt, sent the sign spinning slow. The tree creaked one last time, and behind him, a crow cried once, then silence again. As the horse moves, the sign catches wind and slaps against the tree trunk, the words ringing out one more time. White man takes what is his. The rancher doesn't look back, but in his hand, he clutches a single red feather that caught on his coat. He doesn't know why he keeps it, only that it feels unfinished. The horse moved slow, as if it too understood the weight of what it carried. The girl slumped in the saddle, her limbs limp, her breath a flutter against the front of his coat. He kept his arms firm around her, more like a brace than an embrace, as if she might slip through the cracks of this world if he loosened his grip. They rode toward the canyon, not to the nearest town, not to law, not to questions, only to the place where the wind whispered but never judged. A place with no name, just memory. The rancher's name was Elias. Few still used it. Fewer still remembered it. It hadn't been said in kindness for years. Maybe that's why he didn't speak it aloud. The girl didn't ask, couldn't, but he said it anyway, softly, to no one but the wind. My name's Elias. The sun began to sink behind the hills by the time he reached the cabin. It wasn't much, just timber, stone, and roof, but it was shelter, a place where people used to laugh, where his wife once sang to the chickens before the cough took her, where the crib still stood in the corner, empty since the winter of '79. Elias laid the girl down on the bed. Her hair splayed like ink on the pillow. She stirred, just a little, a flinch when the blanket touched her shoulder. Her lips moved. No sound came. He knelt beside her and studied her face for the first time without the shadows. Her left eye was swollen shut. There were blood stains along her neck, not just from the rope, but from fists. Her bottom lip had been split and dried into a dark line. But her cheekbones were strong. Her brow set firm even in unconsciousness, like she was carved from something older than sorrow. He lit a lamp. The light flickered across the cabin, dancing on the walls where old drawings still lingered, his son's, now faded. A horse, a handprint, a stick-figure buffalo. Elias dipped a rag into warm water and sat on the edge of the bed. He cleaned her face with care. Not like she was broken, but like she might one day be whole again. Her skin flinched at first, then relaxed. Outside, coyotes called in the distance. The night had begun. Elias rose to his feet, walked outside, and stared at the horizon. He thought about that sign, still nailed to the base of the tree, still shouting without a voice. White man takes what is his. Who were they referring to? The girl property. Him a thief, or maybe the land itself. Maybe the phrase wasn't a warning, it was a belief. A ritual carved into pine and blood. He hated how easy it was to understand. Back inside, she was breathing deeper now. The rise and fall of her chest steady. Her hand rested limply over the edge of the bed. He noticed her palm. Scar, thin, pale, looping patterns across the skin like some ritualistic branding. Not from fire, not from accident. These had been made on purpose. A story carved in silence. He didn't ask. Instead, he boiled water. Ground herbs from a drawer he hadn't opened in years. The mix smelled of willow and smoke. Medicine his wife once made for fevers. He spooned a little between her lips. She swallowed. A small sound escaped her throat, a whimper. Maybe. Or a word. He leaned closer. She whispered, barely audible, sky. His brow furrowed. You see the sky? He asked softly, confused. Her head shook, then again. No. She breathed. My name. Sky. The room changed shape with that word. Not just a girl, not just a victim, but a name. Sky. Elias stepped back, as if the name itself asked for space. The fire crackled low. He settled into the old wooden chair, eyes heavy, mind racing. He hadn't touched a woman since his wife died. Hadn't spoken to one in nearly as long. But Sky didn't need words. She needed not to be touched unless asked. Not to be spoken for. Not to be pitied. Only witnessed. He watched over her through the night. When she trembled in her sleep, he whispered nothing. When she cried out, he stayed still. There are moments in life that feel louder than any noise. The hush between thunderclaps. The breath held between tragedy and healing. This was one of them. In the corner, an old wooden carving sat forgotten on a shelf. A bird, a sparrow, wings half broken. One Elias made for his son the winter the child stopped coughing and started stilling. He turned it in his hand. A bird that never flew. Like her. But even so, he cut the rope anyway. Just before dawn, Sky stirs. Her eyes open halfway, landing on the carved bird on the shelf. For a moment, Her gaze locks with Elias's, no words, just a flicker of recognition. He sees her eyes shift slightly, not in fear, but in the kind of wariness that says, "I've woken in stranger places." She doesn't flinch. He nods once and turns to stoke the fire. The first light of morning didn't spill into the cabin. It crept, thin and hesitant, like it wasn't sure it was welcome after the night that came before. It brushed over the floorboards, crawled up the table leg, and finally touched the girl's face, the girl named Sky. Elias had barely slept. He didn't move when she stirred, didn't speak when she sat up halfway, groaning through a cracked throat. He just handed her the tin cup of water he'd placed on the table beside the bed. She drank with both hands, trembling like the cup weighed more than her body. He watched from the chair. She didn't thank him. He didn't expect her to. There was nothing polite about survival. She looked around the cabin, noting exits, checking shadows. Her eyes lingered on the axe near the door, the pot still steaming, and finally on him. She stared long, then turned away. He didn't try to speak, only stood, walked to the table, and began to crush willow bark into a paste. Sky tracked every movement, calm, silent, her muscles tight as wire beneath the blanket. He approached slowly, set the bowl down beside her, then held out a clean rag and a bottle of warm water. The offer was clear, she could clean herself. She nodded once. That was all. He stepped outside, closing the door behind him with a quiet click. The sun had climbed now, bright and brittle. The desert beyond stretched endless and dry, as if it too had nothing left to say. Elias sat on the front step, hands folded, head low, inside. He heard water splash gently, fabric moving, the scrape of the stool against the floor. Then nothing. When he returned an hour later, she was wearing the same dress, but her face had been scrubbed clean. Her hair was combed roughly, pulled back with a strip of leather. She had covered her bruises with a shawl he didn't recognize his wife's. Folded in the chest at the foot of the bed, he didn't question it. She looked at him like a woman who had learned not to ask for permission. He nodded, then wordlessly. He set down a plate of eggs and boiled potato, warm but untouched since sunrise. She didn't eat, just stared. The sparrow carving still sat on the shelf. She pointed to it. "You make that?" she asked, voice like dust on glass. He blinked, surprised. "Yeah." "What happened to the wings?" He hesitated. "They broke." She studied it a moment longer, then whispered, "Fix it." Not a request, a command. He didn't answer, and not with words, but after a long breath he reached up, took the bird down, and placed it on the table between them. "I'll try," he said. Sky touched it gently, turned it once in her fingers, then set it back with reverence, like the broken thing still mattered. And maybe that was the point. She rose slowly, joints stiff, legs unsure, but she stood. And when she walked across the room, she didn't stumble. She just moved quiet, cautious, deliberate. Outside, the wind picked up, dry grass scratched against the walls. She stepped to the window, peered out, and whispered, "They think I'm dead." Elias didn't ask who they were. He didn't need to. Instead, he said the only thing that mattered. "You're not." She didn't respond, only kept watching the horizon, her fingers resting lightly on the glass. That afternoon, she didn't speak again, but she took the carving tools from the wall, chose a sliver of pine, sat by the window and began to whittle. Elias didn't stop her, didn't offer advice. He just watched. She was carving a bird, not a sparrow, something bigger, unfamiliar. The wings weren't broken, they were tucked, folded, like breath held between storms. He wanted to ask why, what it meant, but he understood that silence had its own kind of conversation. He went to chop firewood instead, let her be. When he returned, the bird was half finished, and Sky was asleep in the chair, the carving still warm in her palm. He covered her with the old quilt and sat down again, the fire crackling low, and for the first time since the day he buried his son, Elias did something he thought he'd forgotten how to do. He exhaled without pain. Later that night, as the fire burned low, Elias placed her half-carved bird next to his own broken one on the table. Two unfinished things, side by side. In the silence between them, he noticed something carved lightly into the base of her bird, barely visible under the flickering light, a single dot, followed by a curve, a symbol, or a word. He squinted, puzzled, then left it be. The next morning, the air smelled like cedar and ash. Sky was already awake when Elias opened his eyes, standing barefoot near the far wall of the cabin, charcoal in hand. Eyes narrowed in focus, she was drawing. Not like a child with scribbles and flourishes, but slowly, precisely, like the image had lived inside her long before the hand ever moved. Each stroke of the charcoal left a mark blacker than the last. The bird took form under her fingers, piece by piece. It had no wing. One side of the body arched upward in flight, but where the second wing should have been, only blank wood, intentionally left unfinished. Elias watched without speaking. Sky paused once, as if aware of his gaze, but she didn't turn, just stared at the image in front of her like it had something to say. After a while, she spoke, quiet, detached. My mother used to say birds don't fly until they're ready, but some of us get thrown anyway. She stepped back from the wall. Dust clung to her hands and her breath trembled, but her spine stayed straight. I was 10, she said. They came to trade, brought sugar, rope, bullets. They took me when my father refused the horses. Elias's jaw tightened. They cut my braids, told me I was lucky, that I'd been chosen, told me a man always claims what's owed. She turned now, met his eyes with a stare so still it felt like stone. One of them wore a hat like yours. He didn't flinch, didn't defend himself, or apologize for something he never did. Just nodded once, slow, a kind of surrender. Not guilt, but acknowledgement. The wind outside rustled the brush. The fire cracked. But inside the cabin, everything else went quiet. Sky walked to the table and picked up the half-carved bird from yesterday. She studied it again, ran her finger along the uncut wood where the wings would one day be. "Do you believe things can change?" she asked. Elias stared at the fire. "I believe some things can be rebuilt." She sat across from him, rested her elbows on the table. Her shawl slipped, revealing the scar that looped down her arm, thin and white like a vine made of lightning. "They branded me once. Said it would remind me what I was." She traced the curve with her finger. "I thought if I never told anyone, it would stop being real." He didn't interrupt. "Then I thought if I told someone, it would break me." Her voice cracked there barely, and now he asked gently. She looked at him with something like defiance, but softer. A scar turned into steel. "Now I think it only breaks me if no one listens." Elias rose slowly, walked to the shelf, and brought down his bird carving. He set it beside hers again, the broken beside the incomplete. "Then I'm listening," he said. Sky nodded. The afternoon passed with few words, just quiet carving, soft glances, and the shared rhythm of two people trying to make something whole. At one point, Elias brought in fresh wood. She was bent over the wall again, adding something small beneath the bird. He couldn't see it, not clearly, but he noticed her hand trembled less, and her back stood straighter. That night, Sky sat by the fire, hands resting in her lap. She asked about the woman in the photograph on the mantel. "My wife," Elias said. "Where is she gone? Did she leave?" "No. The fever did." Sky nodded like she understood. "Because she did." They shared a meal that didn't taste like much, but it filled them just the same. The silence between bites wasn't awkward, it was reverent. Later, as the stars pushed through the sky like old nails through black leather, Sky stood at the door and whispered something to the wind. Elias couldn't make it out. Didn't try. Some words aren't meant for other people, just ghosts. Before bed, Elias returned to the wall and looked closely at what she'd added beneath the bird. There, under the missing wing, She had drawn a small shape, faint and delicate. A hand. Not reaching for the bird, but holding it aloft, as if someone still believed it could fly. He stared at it long after the fire went out. The next day dawned with a sky so blue it almost looked like a lie. Too clean. Too open, like nothing cruel had ever happened under it. But that's the thing about the West, it hides pain and beauty. Bury enough bones beneath the prairie and even the wildflowers forget to ask whose blood fed them. Elias was mending the fence when he noticed her. Sky had come out barefoot, her steps light, careful. She walked along the ridge of the pasture, one hand grazing the top of the dry grass like it might vanish if she gripped too hard. He didn't say a word. She sat on the old bench by the water trough, still staring at the earth, her shoulders hunched forward, the way people sit when they're afraid to relax. Safety was a trick someone once played on them. Elias finished his work slowly, deliberately. He gave her space the way a man does when he knows words won't fix what was broken. She finally spoke. What happens when someone saves you but you're not ready to be saved? Elias removed his gloves, leaned against the post, and considered. Then you wait, he said, until the saving doesn't feel like stealing. Sky nodded. Just once. She pulled something from her pocket, a thin leather cord. Wrapped in it, a small carving. The beginnings of a wing, not yet sanded smooth. I dreamed of falling, she whispered, but I didn't hit the ground. He waited. You caught me. Her voice didn't shake. Elias moved toward her, slow, every step like it weighed 10 pounds. He didn't sit beside her. Not yet. Just stood a few feet away. Why me, he asked. Sky didn't look up. Because you didn't flinch when I said the word brand. Because you gave me your wife's shawl. Because you didn't stare at my bruises like they told a story that belonged to you. She paused. And because you cut the rope, even though the sign was meant to stop you and I. She looked at him now. Fully, he sat beside her. Not too close. The bench creaked beneath their weight. The wind passed between them, brushing her hair across her face. She didn't move it. Elias reached out, slowly. His hand hovered near her cheek. Waiting. She nodded. His fingers gently tucked the hair behind her ear. It wasn't lust, or pity, or possession. It was the simplest thing he'd done in years, and it felt like the bravest. Sky closed her eyes and leaned slightly into his touch. Her hand came to rest on his wrist, small, calloused, steady. Neither spoke. The silence between them grew warm. Later, back inside, they shared coffee, burnt, bitter, but hot. Sky asked, "Do you ever feel like you were born wrong?" He shook his head. Not wrong, just too late to fix anything. She smiled, faint but real. I used to think love was something that came after everything else. After pain, after healing. But maybe it is the healing. She reached across the table and touched the bird carving again. This time, she held it differently, like she could see the wing that wasn't there. He noticed. You think it'll fly? Sky met his eyes. No, she said, then softened. But I think it'll try. They didn't kiss. That would have been too easy. Too loud for the language they were learning to speak. But when she moved to stand, her hand stayed on his for a moment longer than necessary. And when she walked to the door, she paused, turned, and asked, "If they come back, those men, will you stand with me?" Elias didn't answer with words. He stood, walked to the door, took down the rifle from above the frame, and placed it gently on the table between them. Sky looked at it, then looked at him, and nodded. That was enough. That night, as the fire dimmed, Sky couldn't sleep. She rose quietly and returned to the bird on the wall. With trembling hands, she added the missing wing. Not perfect, but there. The line shook. But the intention was clear. Elias watched from the shadows, unseen. Outside, a distant sound of hooves echoed on the prairie, slow, steady, getting closer. The hoofbeats didn't lie. 3 riders crested the hill just after dawn, their shadows long across the dirt like claws stretching toward the cabin. Dust rose behind them, no hurry, no fear, The kind of men who didn't need speed to make a point. Elias saw them first. He was chopping wood when he noticed the glint of sunlight off a rifle barrel. By the time Skye stepped onto the porch, barefoot and holding her bird carving, he was already reaching for his revolver. Skye didn't ask who they were. She already knew. One of them wore the same red neckerchief as before the one who carved the first sign. Another had a scar across his chin like a second mouth. And the third, the one in front, held something in his hand. A new sign and burned into a pine slab. Words still smoldering around the edges. White man never forgets. He lifted it high and shouted, "We came to collect what's ours." Elias stepped forward. "She's not yours." The man smirked. "Neither are you." The third man, silent until now, dismounted. His boots hit the earth like thunder. He drew a knife, lazily, as if sharpening boredom, then pointed it toward Skye. "She ran. She belongs to us." Skye didn't flinch. She walked down the steps, the sparrow carving still in her hand. "I'm not the one who ran," she said coldly. "That hit." Even the horses seemed to shift at her voice. The leader's jaw tightened. "She was marked," the scarred man said. "She was paid for." Elias stepped in front of her. "Then I'm the debt collector now." The wind stilled. Guns weren't drawn yet, but they would be. Skye moved to Elias's side. She opened her hand, showing the sparrow. Cracked. The wing had broken off sometime during the night. She didn't weep, didn't look away. She simply held it up, silent testimony to what had been taken and what had been earned back. The man with the knife laughed. "A toy bird. You think that makes her yours?" Elias didn't answer. He raised the rifle slowly, steady. "You don't belong here," he said. "And you do." The leader snarled. "You think playing house with a savage girl makes you a man?" Elias's voice turned sharp. "I think protecting someone makes you one." The leader spat. That was the moment. When words died and blood took their place, the knife man lunged first. Elias fired once, clean shot to the thigh. The man dropped with a howl. Skye didn't retreat. She moved forward quick, precise, and slammed the sparrow carving into the leader's chest. The broken wing jabbed into his throat. He choked, stumbled. Elias spun, aimed, and fired again. The leader's hat flew off, a graze but enough to humble. The third man hesitated. His hand hovered over his holster. Skye stared him down and whispered something in Apache, a curse or a prayer. He blinked, lowered his hand, turned, and mounted his horse. "I didn't sign up for this," he muttered, then vanished over the hill. The leader and the knife man crawled backward, faces bloodied, pride shattered. "You think you've won," the leader rasped. Skye knelt beside him, held up the sparrow now fully broken. "You already lost," she whispered. They left on foot, blood trailing behind. Silence returned, not peace, but something close. Skye stood in the doorway, watching the dust settle. Elias joined her. Neither spoke. She handed him the sparrow, now in pieces. "Can you fix it?" she asked. He looked at the shards in his palm. "No," then paused. "But I can make a new one." She smiled. This time, it reached her eyes. That evening, as dusk painted the cabin in soft blues and golds, Elias brought out fresh wood and carving tools. Skye picked up the charcoal. They didn't speak, but together, they began again, him with the carving, her with a new bird on the wall. This one already had both wings. Outside, the wind moved gently, carrying no signs, only the sound of breath and cedar smoke. The dawn came soft, not like the angry light of the desert, not like the harshness of fire or gunpowder. It arrived quiet, honey gold pouring through the cabin windows, touching the floorboards, the carved table, and finally the wall. The bird was there, finished, both wings stretched wide, rising from the wall as if it might lift off at any second. Skye stepped back from it, her charcoal-streaked fingers trembling not from fear, but from release. She stood barefoot in the soft light, eyes fixed on what she had made. Elias stood behind her, just outside the frame of her piece, holding something in his hand, a new sparrow. carved from pine, sanded smooth, wings whole. She didn't turn, but she knew he was there. The silence between them now wasn't tense, it was sacred, the kind shared only by those who have survived something together, the kind you earn. A real bird landed on the windowsill, a sparrow. It fluttered once, looked at them, and settled unafraid. Sky watched it, breathing slowly. Elias stepped forward, the carved sparrow still in his grip. He didn't offer it, just held it in front of him, looking down at the small object like it was more than wood. "I burned the sign," he said. "The one they left." Sky nodded. "Good," she whispered. He turned the sparrow over in his palm. On the underside, carved with quiet care, there were 6 words: "To the man who stayed." Sky blinked, her mouth parting slightly. She reached out not for the bird, but for his hand. She touched it gently, then took the carving and placed it on the windowsill next to the real sparrow. They sat side by side, one made of flesh, the other of memory. Neither flew away. Sky leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. He didn't speak, just reached up, touched her hair, and let his fingers rest there. They stood like that for a long time. Outside, the prairie stretched wide and unbroken. The twisted tree still stood in the distance, its black bark catching light, but the sign was gone. Only a faint scorch remained in the dust where the words had once claimed ownership. No one came for them anymore. No one watched. No one needed to. They had made their own ending. Inside, Sky picked up the carving tools once more. She began to etch something small beneath the painted bird on the wall. Elias moved to her side. Together, they watched the new lines form a tiny hand holding the bird's tail, and beneath that, a trail of dots leading upward into the sky. Not a cage, not a chain, but a release. She turned to him. "You think it'll be enough?" He looked at the wall, the light, the new beginning stretching quietly around them. "No," he said, then smiled. "But it's more than we had." The fire crackled low in the hearth. A pot simmered with stew, somewhere far off. A hawk cried into the wind. Elias sat at the table, rolling a new piece of wood between his fingers. Sky opened the door and stepped onto the porch. She closed her eyes, letting the morning light touch her face. Then she whispered, not to him but to the wind, "I forgive the ground for what it grew." The wind answered, carrying the words far beyond the hills. The sparrow on the sill chirped once, then flew. Sky didn't follow with her eyes. She didn't need to. She'd already let it go. And in doing so, she stayed. With him, in the quiet after everything, in a cabin that once held ghosts, and now held hope. I forgive the ground for what it grew. Some wounds don't bleed anymore, but they still ache when the weather changes. This story is not about a rescue, it's about the long, quiet work of staying. It's about the rare kind of man who cuts a rope no one told him to, about the woman who learned to draw wings again, even after hers were taken. Many of us carry signs, words others hung around our necks without permission. Unworthy. Too late. Not enough. But Sky teaches us that healing doesn't arrive with grand gestures. It comes in soft mornings, warm water, and someone who never asks you to explain your scars. Elias reminds us that presence is the most powerful form of protection, that a man who stays even in silence is louder than 1,000 apologies. Sometimes love isn't loud. It doesn't ride in with guns blazing. Sometimes it just waits beside you while you learn how to breathe again. And when the world tells you what you are, break the sign, carve your own name, and let the bird fly.